Hi, welcome to another episode of I Mustache You Something. If you hear the loathing and disappointment in my voice, it is for Yousef Hanna's internet connection.
It's true. That is my fault.
Well, it's not, I don't know if it's your fault, but I'm holding you responsible. Like I said, I'm not a understanding or fair person.
So, knowing that, I came prepared with a joke that I hope will lighten your spirits. What did the Pacific Ocean say to the Atlantic Ocean?
Do I
Nothing.
have to say what?
They just waved.
I'm very tempted to end this interview.
As you are with most of our conversations. But our friendship has lasted this long, and I'm thankful for that.
Which I'm not really sure how because I still haven't gotten an explanation for the cape.
It's true. It's true because I do believe the future of men's fashion will go there. But hold me accountable in 20 years.
What is the status of your cape?
Uh, well, not that I'm bragging, but I definitely do own a cape. I'd like to make mine still the one that I've designed many years ago, but I've not been able to accomplish this so far. My sewing machine needles have been breaking on the fake leather, but we'll deal with that another time.
So what you're saying is the cape that you designed has not been actualized, but you bought one?
Yes, that is what I'm saying.
Where does one buy a cape for men?
Very good question. This was actually a store that sold odds and ends, and so they had a bunch of costumes from some movies, and so I think this one was from one of the Lord of the Rings movies.
Do you have it like near where you are?
It's like in the other room.
You go ahead. We'll play some music or something. Go grab it.
Let's do that later. Let's do that later. We'll come back to it. It'll be a whole segment.
Are you scared of showing people the cape?
I just don't want to open with a cape.
Okay. Okay. Maybe we'll warm up to it.
Right. We'll get there.
It'll keep people watching. I like that.
So,
So,
tell me, how has your cooking been lately?
did you see the article I posted on coffee?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I think you'd appreciate this. So I put it on my Medium account, and the other articles that I wrote were like, you know, kind of professional articles for like patients and for them to kind of see, how I think about shoulder surgery and like decision making and stuff. And then I was like, I really want to write this coffee thing, so I just did. And several people have actually tried the coffee method, and I've converted them into coffee snobs that, they're like, I can't drink anything else. Like, what is this?
Okay, cool. I'll have to check it out. I
Yeah.
The one of my fondest memories, both with you and in general, was smoking meat for the Super Bowl. Reason I bring it up now.
Yeah. I had a buddy just actually a Heb Bolatus. I don't know if you know a Heb. He just bought a house, but more importantly, he bought a Kamado Joe smoker. So I'm excited to, uh, you know, go to someone else's house, and he's the one that's been up all night tending the flame and making perfect uh, pork and brisket and ribs.
Yeah, I swear we used a literal baby timer so that we could make sure that we were checking on it at a reason or a well, I guess it was a temperature monitor, so let's not call it a baby monitor. Anyway, what are we going to split hairs?
So what's new with you? We were talking before the recording about what we're going to talk about, and we're like, let's catch up. And I said, let's record. So what's new with you?
What's new with me? There's been, I guess, I've been working on a whole bunch of projects. I'm always jumping around, having a whole bunch of things on my plate. But the funner things have been both reorganizing my apartment, which has been great, And also, I've been just swallowing whole courses on biblical scholarship that I did not think I was going to be interested in. But honestly, like I've found a few of them that have just been on YouTube, and I've blazed through them, and I don't know that I'd have enjoyed them in school, but without any pressure and just listening to them, it's been interesting. It's been good to have a separate perspective and learn more about the actual text.
So Old Testament, New Testament, both.
Bit of both, but I'm most interested in the Old Testament, and even most interested in the 5 books of Moses, so to speak. I think it's such a interesting foundational narrative. I could almost make the argument that it's the equivalent of the Trojan War series in Greek culture.
Hmm. Tell me more about that perspective.
It, I guess, it's the birth of a nation, right?
Hmm.
It's the explanation of the foundation myth of the people that will produce Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. So
Hmm.
it's important that they recognize their own historical past, and not to say that the stories in it are divorced from any historical past. Neither is the Trojan War, but that certain elements of the stories may have been framed, embellished, or even just had a spotlight shown upon them, because the people who were putting this together, the person who put it together in the end, had a mission in mind to unite these disparate people who were living in the Promised Land, or what
Hmm.
became known as the Promised Land.
Hmm. Hmm. And you mentioned like the people that put it together. Like, is there any discussion of like the different sources, like the Deuteronomist, the Elohist, the Yahwist, like all those different narratives that kind of come together to form the 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 Torah, as it would be?
Yeah, I think that's what made it the most interesting for me. That's the idea that you could break down the Torah into almost 4 pieces that read themselves as contiguous narratives,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and that they are stitched together is itself an intentional thing, and so that creates what we are. It is the foundational myth for the society that emerged from it, the early Iron Age society that was settling in the hill country in what is modern day Israel.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
those people came from a whole bunch of places. There's some really interesting theories that I've heard that those people have come from places as far away as Greece and Egypt. And the people who were coming from Greece, for example, who may have had ancestrally called themselves Danaans, might call themselves the tribe of Dan. And a story about a long-haired hero who was very strong, something like Hercules, might have translated to Samson of the tribe of Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like the story of the Exodus is the story of a group of people who left Egypt and came to join the people of Israel in the hills, and that their escape from Pharaoh, however small it was what they taught to the people around them, and that became the tradition of Passover. And despite not everyone in the nation of Israel experiencing it, this birthed what became a united people. And I think that in itself is worth learning about.
Interesting.
And I'm
So,
sure it seems you have a discussion of the sources under your sleeve as well. What do you think of it when you read it?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where a little bit of knowledge is really dangerous. And I think if you're prepared and willing to put the work in to both understand on an intellectual level and reflect on a spiritual level, um, so that the the mind, body, soul, spirit combination um, is edified. I think it's noble and it's beneficial. I think if you'd learn just enough to be confused and to start thinking like, oh, so somebody just kind of threw this all together. Oh, does it mean it's not real? And it's like, whoa, 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 hold on a second. Like, no, 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 no. Like nobody said it wasn't real. Right. And you use the word like the foundational myth. And that language is going to be problematic for some people if they don't say Um, Also, that it it's it's not a myth if you believe it, right? And to the people that were reading Gilgamesh and reading Greek um, uh, uh, mythology and Norse mythology, like you can't dispute their interpretation of the real, right? You can't say like, oh well, that was fake, that was made up, and this is real. So yes, to you it's real. To you it is a matter of faith. To them, they'll look at yours and go, yeah, it's the same. And yes, we do have ways of interrogating and apprehending and um, you know understanding what the differences are. And C.S. Lewis does a phenomenal job of distinguishing myth from faith, right? And he says, no, like if we're going to talk about which one is the coolest myth, and he was a theologian, but he was also a classicist, right? And he said, like, listen, if I was going to say which one's my favorite, I would say Norse mythology. Like, that's the one that's the coolest. But the one that is real in his faith and in his understanding was Christianity. So yeah, I think that I think it's worth it. But if someone's not gonna go in again with enough effort and enough thought and enough um, uh, spiritual foundation and commitment, then it could become problematic.
Yeah, I totally agree. I couldn't have said it better myself.
So yeah. So anyway, so um, what got you into this? How did that happen?
Uh, Very interesting question. It leads down a whole nother rabbit hole that we'll talk about.
Nice.
I'm sure. Yeah. So I got into it because I was learning about ancient Egypt a whole bunch, and I was learning about ancient Egypt a whole bunch because I want to get in touch with my roots and I want to get in touch with my history, and that's something that I've always been fond of, something that I've always tried to learn more about. But what I think made it more interesting for me most recently was my interest, and I think I've talked to you about this in the past, in evolving the ancient Egyptian language more step.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so the ancient Egyptian language has gone through several transitions. Let me catch you up just in case, where it's gone from the beautiful characters on the wall that are like very intricately drawn and they're carved in, and yeah, it's beautiful and very cumbersome and hard to write. And so very quickly, in fact, almost coeval with the same time that we get the earliest hieroglyphs, we get the earliest hieratic, which are like simplified symbols that you scrawl on a papyrus. And it's like, okay, and because papyri will last so long in the Egyptian desert, we actually have a whole bunch of these. And so we have a lot of hieratic, and that evolves millennia down the line as those symbols become more simplified and form what becomes known as the Demotic script. Demotic meaning of the people, hieratic having been of the priestly class, where hieroglyphs, literally holy writing, this is just what's on the temple walls and what's on tomb walls. And so the Demotic alphabet eventually, after the Hellenistic period in Egyptian history and after Alexander the Great, 332 BC, you get the introduction of the Greek alphabet. And eventually this transforms officially into the Coptic alphabet, which adds several demotic characters to describe letters that don't exist in the Greek alphabet. But it continues to describe the same contiguous language, at the very least, the same contiguous language from Middle Egyptian. You could argue Old Egyptian is like a completely different thing, but Middle Egyptian to Coptic, there's definitely a continuum that you can follow. And that Coptic script was officially instituted, they say, in the 2nd century by Clement and Pantaenus. But that, I feel, deserves an update, considering most people don't know how to read it and aren't connected to it. And the Greek script is not used outside of Greece for a lot of things these days. So there's not really a point to having your language written in it. So I feel that at some point it should have been done officially in an Arabic script in Egypt, but at this point we should just skip right to English, because the English script is, I think, more regular and in common with the Greek script and is more universally recognized, especially outside of Egypt. So I'm calling it Chemetic, and I've been working on a couple of transliterations and translations from old texts. And because I was learning a whole bunch about these old Egyptian texts, and some of them have very interesting parallels with the stories in the Bible, I started jumping into the biblical scholarship lectures.
So spell Kemetic,
Kemetic.
and how'd you come up with that?
So Chemet, KMT is the consonants of it. We technically don't know what the vowels are, but KMT is the word that the Egyptians used to describe their own land. So the land of the Nile, the black land of the Nile, is what Kemet literally means, as opposed to the Deshret, which is the red land, the red land of the desert. And those were the only two universes in Egyptian culture. And so when they went to conquer more for the black land. And it was never really we're going to invade the desert. It's we're going to conquer more fertile land. Added to our kit.
Fascinating.
So it's what we call ourselves. In Coptic, we call ourselves Enremen Kimi, of
Yeah,
Kimi, Kemet. So that's the
yeah,
correlate.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the modernization of it in our modern Coptic language.
That's fascinating. So who do you have as collaborators on this?
We actually have a number of people, but mostly at this point, it's been a lot of me pushing people. So if anyone wants to get involved, reach out to me. I'll happily accept a whole bunch of help. I think my first projects are going to be trying to get the Gospels and the Book of the Dead going.
And you're on Facebook, right?
Personally, yes.
Okay. So we'll post this as a clip, and anyone that listens to this that is interested in developing the Coptic language into Kemetic, which will be the newest iteration of the Coptic language transliterated in English, but in a not like transliterated like so you can follow along the hymn, but like in a more formalized, predictable way. They can contact you on Facebook.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. That sounds
that'd be awesome.
awesome.
That'd be awesome. Um, cool. So tell us more about the motivation behind the why, because that's something I kind of know already, but I think is an interesting story.
I mean, it seems to me that this language is one of the two oldest languages on the planet, one of the three oldest languages on the planet. And I would hate to see it go the way of other languages. That it has been preserved in our church is honestly a miracle. And honestly, it seems to me the church is not the place for it. It seems to me that the church should be using the language of its congregants, but that the language has been preserved for us to take it from here is beautiful, and I'm glad for it. And I think what needs to happen is for this language to really become a language again. It needs to first start in a literary and a spoken sense at the same time, but and in different ways. In a literary, high literary sense, to transliterate old books and classics, and spoken in like a very slang sense. And I think one of the things that I'd love for people to take away from this is the single word nufri, which has also been pronounced nufri in modern Coptic, but nufri I think is an older pronunciation that speaks closer to the ancient Egyptian, and it just means good. And it's the way that you would greet someone. And so you would greet someone and say good. Nufri.
No free. What's up, man? No free.
That's what's up. And so I'd love for that to be something that we could take out of this.
Is Nufri Shy? Is that New Year?
I think so.
Yeah,
Good year or something.
yeah, yeah. Like, but it's what you say um, on Coptic New Year. It's what you say on
Nairuz.
September 12th on Nowruz.
And
Um,
for happy birthday, it's Nofri Bek Ehum Misi.
yeah,
So
yeah. Carol Buttrose actually taught us a Coptic birthday song, and I think it goes Nufri back, back, back. And I don't know. I I obviously like I was in college at the time, or like recently graduated from college, so only a couple of years ago.
right. Mm-hmm.
And I was, I guess, slightly less mature than I am now because I'm only slightly more mature. And like I think I kept saying like, it sounds like a chicken, back, 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 and that was it. Like I didn't have the maturity to get past the no free back, back, back.
I understand. I also would have been distracted as a young man coming out of college.
Uh, like I don't know if I heard it now if I could engage any more meaningfully with it, but I knew for sure then that it wasn't in the cards. So you're different from the people that say get rid of Coptic, and you're different from the people that say only Coptic, and you find yourself aligned with me in the no, like Coptic is good. No, we should pray in English. And it's like, what? Like, you've alienated both sides. Like, you need to pick a side. And it's like, no. Like,
It's a contra mundi situation.
yeah, and it's like it's a beautiful language. There's beautiful hymns that if they translate well, like Tishori or the Lopsh of the First Host, like Chen Oshot in English is like beautiful. And then there's other hymns that are more difficult to translate, that are more beautiful in the original language, like Sherene Moreyan, like the seventh part of the Theotokeia, and like Tinin. Like, I don't know, like, am I going to be against someone translating Tinin in English? Like, no, but like, I like it in Coptic. Like, what? Like, so sue me. Like, get mad. Go ahead, get mad. Ah. And then like,
give it time. It's I feel like the Chemetic, I'm going to start saying pronunciation of those,
like
and those the Chemetic hymns that will have survived will themselves be a musical tradition that I hope is evolved upon. What I'm really, really hoping for, and I'm gunning for here, is that this becomes a language of art, that we get not only poetry but music in it, and we develop from that old musical style that we've sort of kept for, what is it, 17 centuries now, since Athanasius read that psalm when he was being arrested and they made it the third host. And we can evolve that. We can take it forward and see if we can develop it into something even at more modern. But it's not, the point is not to keep it with hymns. The point is to develop the music and the language and the culture.
I want to get back to that because there's a lot more there, but I want you to tell us that story about Saint Athanasius first, because I haven't heard that, and that just blew my mind.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So the Tazbeha has been a thing obviously for a very long time, and each part of Tazbeha has been added to Tazbeha over time for a reason. And the very first, this is a story that was passed down to me, I can't even remember by whom, but the very first instance of it was when Athanasius was in the cathedral reading Psalm 136, and he had his congregants return to him, and his mercy endures forever, after every line. And so that became the third host. I can't remember if I got the psalm right. I really hope I did, because we're being recorded.
You did, and it depends on the numbering, because in the Psalmody it's going to go by the Coptic Bible translation. It's going to be 135, but the Psalm in the New King James translation is going to be 136. So that's fascinating, and even if it's not true, I think that's one of those stories where I'm like, oh yeah, that's
foundational myth. It's important to us. This is, and Tazbeha was born on this. That's cool. That's I could vibe with that.
Yeah, I'm like okay, like someone might listen to this like, this is heresy. The disciples were singing Tazbeha in the upper room in like, sure, yeah, that's fine.
They were. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have a harder time wrapping my head around that as a credible myth, but okay, that's fine.
What better proof of the inspiration of the Holy Spirit than that they spoke the whole thing in Coptic?
Sure, yeah, why not? Like, and that's what we're gonna sing in heaven is, the third host in Coptic, absolutely. But I think that you're touching on a point that is also sensitive to people, which is this idea of creativity. And again, it's going to be that same school that says we've always had Tazbeha. Well,
it's like saying we've always had. Let me not get into that. That's a whole set of weeds.
What like?
You may need to edit this out, but
no, there's no editing. So if you want it to be out in the public domain, say it.
It's not about me. It's about the church.
I mean, listen, I'm not going to censor you, but if you worry about who's going to listen to this and say, then don't say it.
It's not even about that, but I hope that people will take this and learn more about this, because I don't know all the details, but I remember it was explained to me the reason why. But that for like a solid century, confession was banned in the Coptic Church.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily a glamorous part of our history, but it's important that we know about it. So I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, Abu Nadan, I don't know if you've listened to the recording with him, but he alluded to this, and he said there is I forget exactly what examples he gave, but I think he gave the example of the fast of Saint Mary, where like one pope got rid of it, and then the next pope brought it
Yep.
back,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, okay, like nobody's head exploded, nobody walked away from the church and said, "Oh, you got rid of Saint Mary's fast," like, okay, that means God doesn't exist. And I was just having this conversation with someone about slippery slope arguments don't apply to theology, right? Slippery slope arguments, you can say them in politics, you can say them in rhetoric, you can say them in like, to zahlat somebody. They don't work in theology because everything in theology that's worth discussing is a paradox. So a slippery slope argument has to hit a hard stop that keeps you in the paradox. If you say, "Oh, that's a slippery slope," yeah, but those arguments don't hold water in a theological or Christological, ecclesiological discussion. Like if you can't talk about the church and our relationship to God and say, "Oh, that's a slippery slope," like everything's a slippery slope. Like, "Oh, Jesus is fully human, huh?" Like, what do you mean? Like, does that mean blah 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 blah? It's like, no, because he's also fully divine. Oh, fully divine. Oh, does that mean blah 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 blah? It's like, no, because he's fully human. And like those two things are constantly in tension with each other. And you'll never end up saying a definitive statement about one that doesn't contradict the other, but in a mystery that is in harmony. So again, when people get uncomfortable with certain things, it's because they follow these slippery slope arguments that are completely flawed and problematic for theology and church history.
It's worth always taking a step back and thinking about the bigger picture.
Absolutely, but I do think that again the word creativity is lost on us in the modern era because the church has always been this way. Voices are too strong. And at some point, someone decided something that didn't exist before and then existed after they decided it as an individual or as a group. Saint Athanasius, who mentioned, is credited with uh, having the earliest complete record of the New Testament canon being written down somewhere.
367, the Codex Sinaiticus. That's super cool. And the relationship between that and early Christian history, let's not even begin to get into that. That's its own rabbit hole.
Right. So and I don't know if it's the same document as his festal letter, but whatever the document was, and whatever it's called in like different traditions or different parlances, it's going to be the first time in the 4th century that someone finally says like, okay, here's the whole New Testament canon. Before that, there was a mind of the church. There was, some sort of informal agreement that yes, these are the books of the Bible, but it wasn't until then that at least historically speaking, we can look back and say it looks like they finally got it pinned down.
And I think the most interesting thing is that there were definitely different early Christian New Testaments, and some of them excluded some that we have, and some of them included others that we don't. And that goes back to the 2nd century. We have earliest copies. But I think the most interesting part about it is the fact that we fought over what goes into it, because previous to Christianity, what goes into a book like the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, when you think of it in the ancient world, you don't think of it as what we think of as a book, a codex that's bound, that has pages in between it. We think of it as a set of scrolls. And so each Bible was a basket that had a bunch of scrolls in it. And what was in the Bible was a matter of which scrolls you kept inside this basket and which scrolls you kept inside these other baskets. And the Christian tradition of trying to flip through the Bible to prove something to a Jewish argumentator or in an argument, that made them want to bind their books in pages rather than keep the scrolls. And so binding books in pages makes it more difficult to say this comes in and this comes out really easily. You have to make a decision what is going to be bound. And Christianity is sort of shaped by that.
But if we are able to really listen to what you're saying, in that if we can not reformulate but rediscover the Coptic language and express it in modern terms with, you know, English characters, and it opens up a discovery. I think it was Coptic Voice that published this article, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, on the Coptic region Misi, the Coptic Renaissance. Then this Coptic hymnology becomes part of it. And I would say that in addition to having creative new Coptic songs in Coptic, we can have Coptic inspired music in English, right? And
absolutely,
if you think about it, name an English Sully.
never been one.
There's never been one, right? Because a Sully is defined by being numbered
The alpha,
by,
beta, gamma, yeah.
right? So there's the Greek Sali, that's a Repsaline. There's Coptic Salis that are in you know, the Coptic language with the Coptic alphabet, but there's no English Salis. Why? Because people are afraid to put pen to paper.
And what's unknown is that many of those studies in the Theotokeias didn't get written down until the 15th century. So that we have development of new Coptic things at that time is itself interesting, but that we have continued development is what's like it's obvious that the church had a tradition that it was following, but it's obvious that the tradition was intended to be expanded, that it wasn't intended to be static. It's supposed to be dynamic.
So
hopefully we can do that more.
Yeah, and I don't know how it would be received. I'll just come right out and say it. I actually wrote one, and I shared it with a couple of people for communion, because we kept fighting about the communion songs. Like, oh, you got to do what's in the book. You got to say pioik. You can't say anything but pioik. And then like other people would be like, no, we want to sing Sons of God. Sons of God, hear his holy word. We got to sing that one. And then there was like this chasm between Coptic traditionalism and, you know, you want to call it pietism, you want to call it whatever you want, but like, you know, something that appeals to, you know, the congregation and their participation and whatnot. Why can't there be something in the middle that is within the Coptic style, the Coptic tradition, but at the same time is new? And I'll be honest with you, I've been sitting on it for years, afraid that someone is going to excommunicate me because I dared to write this thing on paper.
Well, I hope it sees the light. In fact, I'd love it if you shared it with me, but I hope we can hear it at some time in the church sung in its proper English.
And honestly, like for me, the reason I wrote it wasn't so that it can be sung in this church.
Of course.
It's so that someone else with more musical talent and more musical experience, someone that's actually a lyricist or a, you know, somebody who knows something, you know, looks at that and goes, man, this is horrible. Like, who wrote this? This is horrendous. Oh yeah,
there are a ton of those in the Coptic psalmody that we really should get looked at.
And like, I don't want it to be like, you know, accepted based on authority, right? I want it to be rejected by its lack of merit and open the door for someone else to say, I can do a better job. And for me to say, like, hey, this is really good. And then for people to be like, yeah, but what about the one you wrote? Like, forget the one I wrote. This one's so much better, right? So for that legitimacy to be offered, right, needs someone to throw something out there to say, hey, this is terrible, but you should do better and we should consider it. So your internet connection is making you look very interested in what I'm saying because you're sitting there like, hmm, but nobody sustains their interest in anything I'm saying for that long. So I'm hoping that your internet connection comes
It's
back
back. I'm here.
and I don't have to kill you. Very
Thank
good.
you. I
Very,
appreciate that.
very good. You get to live another day. Actually, I probably shouldn't threaten you like on the recording. I should only threaten you like before and after. Is any of this like admissible in court? Like if we have like a falling out or something, and then you decide like, oh, he's been harassing me. Like, no, I haven't. He threatened to kill me on his YouTube channel. Like, yeah, I did that, but did you see the one with Anthony Zaki? That one was much worse. Oh, so you're threatening other people? No, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Internet's
So,
always spotty up here. It's a third world country, you know.
well, so speaking of which, um, you can go either way. Either make fun of the United States and its crazy political scene and response to the coronavirus, or make fun of Canada and what happened to that medical student that was posted on the internet.
Oh, no. Both of those things are not things I want to talk about.
And the reason I bring both up is because, we have to understand that, like, there's no perfect country where like everything
Oh,
goes well,
absolutely not.
right? Like politics is like, like we're trying to get it just so people don't hurt each other, and then everything else, like, is a wash.
No, I'm really glad to be living in the country that I'm living in, and I'm glad that I lived in the U.S. for the time that I lived there. I don't think that I'll be moving back there unless there's some serious changes.
Yeah, I yeah, I think that I I'm not like a big partisan person where it's like, oh, always this party or always that party. Um, but it's been an interesting year. It's been an interesting year. So you're gonna abstain on both counts.
Look, if you want to talk about either of them, I'm happy to. But I'll be honest with you, the U.S. thing is tied into the Trump thing, and that's just going to be its own, mostly face palming. And the Canada thing, it's so minute, the details. It's almost pedantic. Like I've discussed it now at length a few times, and it's just like it's sinking your teeth into the details. It's not pretty.
Fair enough. So back to the creativity thing. What are other avenues other than Coptic hymnology, um, both in English or in Coptic? So Coptic spiritual hymnology, like um, as a discipline and as a movement and as a direction to point your heart, right? So not necessarily about the language itself, right? What else in our church do you think has a place for creativity?
That's not where I thought your question was going. So that's an interesting one to think about.
Or ask your own question.
Well, I'll let me think about this one, because I think one of the things I wish our church reconsidered was the role of women. And that's not a conversation that most clergy that I've spoken with have had with me satisfactorily. And wish that we would reconsider, because I feel like a lot of those issues that, or a lot of even the laws surrounding the way women are treated in the church and the way they're supposed to behave around communion, for example, I feel like those descend from Jewish impurity laws, which we obviously don't keep kosher. So this seems like a relic that's kind of unnecessary. And the corollary for men is equal, for the record, with regard to behavior before communion, and equally stems from Jewish impurity laws. So it's just not. It seems to me that it's worth reconsidering.
So earlier in this conversation, we brought up slippery slope arguments not holding weight in ecclesiology and theology. They just don't, right? So to say that a 8-year-old girl who knows more hymns than middle school boys is not allowed to stand in the chorus outside the altar, not inside the altar, outside the altar, not inside the altar, outside the altar, not inside the altar, outside the altar, not inside the altar. Right? We're clear.
Yeah. Okay.
I said it at least 3, maybe 4 times.
I mean, I'm gonna go 10 steps further than you, so you continue.
No, like so I'm a low hanging fruit kind of guy. I'm not like let's
Right.
Be controversial guy. I'm like, listen, like let's do the basic things. Let's get the basic things right, and then once we've got the basic things right, then we can start asking challenging questions, right? So like in our church, we have a system where the deacons, like the first, second, and third grade boys, stand in the second row. The fourth, fifth, and sixth grade boys stand in the first row of the congregation benches, right? So they're not even in the chorus. They're just, because we have like 100 deacons on the roster, right? So any given Sunday, you have like 40, 50 deacons. So like it's a lot of people. So you got to organize them. So the chorus up, not in the altar, outside the altar, is reserved for 7th grade and up, right? So it's going to be 7th graders, high school kids, college students, and the basically like a youth chorus. And for all of those, right? Like the second row, the first row, the outside chorus, like to say that if girls stand and sing in those choruses, that the slippery slope argument results in us eventually making them priests doesn't hold water, right? You can say our belief is that men are ordained to the priesthood, full stop. We're not changing that, and you can still do all of these things outside the altar that are not ordained, not priesthood, nothing at all, right? So I have a feeling that you're going to push that envelope, and I'm interested to hear where you go with it.
Well, while there is certainly the very low hanging fruit, definitely, like that seems to be a thing that needs to have happened yesterday. But frankly, the idea that there should be a separation between women and men in the church, I think, stems from, I hesitate to say it because I haven't researched it enough, but I think it stems from our cultural affiliation with the Arab and Muslim influences that emerged in the 7th century in Egypt.
In
Previous
terms
to
of what?
that,
Are you talking about like sitting on opposite sides, or are you talking about
that in specific, the ordination issue emerges before that, obviously, but the earliest church treated women with very high status. Like the women were appointed to be apostles, according to I can't remember which letter of Paul it is that he refers to one of the women there as an apostle. And so it's clear that the laying of the hands was not intended purely for men, even in the words of the Bible itself. So to reserve it from women for whatever arbitrary purpose, the impurity of women during their time of the month seems wholly arbitrary. and completely unnecessary. So I'm not going to die on this hill, but I will always push it if it's available because
Yeah.
it's important.
So I again, low hanging fruit, really not controversial. Anything outside the altar, I think, is fair game in terms of participation, in terms of singing, in terms of uh, reading, even because, I mean, I know this is going to set off all sorts of alarms. I'm going to get all sorts of phone calls, but like the readers of the church, the ognostos, is a teacher, right? So you either kick all the women out of the Sunday school service, in which case you're probably losing not 50% of your servants, but 70% of your servants, right?
Yeah,
Because
at least.
Sunday school servers, I anecdotally, I don't have data, but predominantly women, right? So they're serving as ognostos, they're serving as readers. So really, what difference does it make if they're doing it like in terms of like their parish responsibilities? Why can't they do it in their as a liturgical responsibility, right? And I know that it sounds completely crazy. Like, how dare a woman? Oh, fine, you're right. Forgive me. Like, I want to be part of the church. Like, I've recanted my heresy, no problem. But I personally, I don't see the issue, and I don't see why we can't at least discuss it, right? In terms of the Levitical laws, you're right. We pick and choose like randomly, and certain things that apply to women should apply to men also. And if you read the Levitical laws very carefully, lots of people really shouldn't be taking communion, but they do, right? And again, you follow this slippery slope. I'm going to start calling it the slippery slope heresy, right? You start following the slippery slope heresy, and you say, well, if you do that, then no, not if you do that, then just do that, because there's really no reason not to do that. So yeah, the 40 days, 80 days, yeah, the monthly prohibition of communion, yeah, the chorus, even the readings. I don't think that's problematic. I think where we're going to have a real conversation, and is really going to be challenging, is going to be ordaining women to the priesthood. And I can tell, and people take this the wrong way when I say this is a tough conversation. It's like, oh, so you think they should? I'm like, no, I'm just saying, like, there's nothing wrong with asking the question, right? There's nothing wrong with asking the question. And if our answer is no, that's a bad idea, no, we don't do that, even though women were deacons and apostles and servants and equal to men, we can trace it all the way back to the whatever historical time period where we have ordained priests and bishops, and they were always men, and we want to keep it that way, and that just is the integrity of the church and its history. Sure, no problem. Like you said, I'm not going to die on that hill, but first of all, there's a lot of low hanging fruit that we have not picked.
Right. We haven't even picked the lowest hanging fruit. The idea that during Tazbihah, men and women don't have to form separate parts of the choir. The idea that, in fact, you could form a choral of all of your voices.
Yousef, do you remember? You have to remember how frustrated I was at the tasbihas that you attended, where I'm like, come stand,
Please, yeah, I
like,
remember.
So it's not a patriarchy. Like, I'm the head deacon. I'm there. I'm begging you, please come stand, and there, and I'm not saying this at all to be misogynistic. Quite the opposite. I'm saying, we need to empower the women in our community to claim this right, that whenever possible, to function and to serve in a liturgical fashion, and not, first of all, like, not necessarily wait for an invitation, but certainly not reject an invitation, right? Say, oh, no, we're just gonna, like, you're enabling, I don't want to say part of the problem, because they're the ones that are the victims in all this, and it's not blaming the victim at all, but it's it's an invitation to say, yes, you've had a really hard run at it, but seize opportunities, or at least accept invitations to, um, you know, push the needle in the other direction.
And I feel like that point of view is growing, and I hope it continues to grow. But I don't know. I hope the church of 2 generations from now is a church improved on from where we're at now.
So first of all, I didn't see that coming. I was just asking like creativity, in like poetry or like,
Well, that's separate from the church completely. I don't think any of that. I want there to be Kemetic rap, my friend. I want there to be novels written in Kemetic. I want there to be short stories and entire universes. I want people to play games in Kemetic. But that has nothing to do with the church. That has to do with our culture and us reclaiming it. And the church has given us that ability, which I'm thankful for, but has nothing to do with it.
so where's the synergy?
No, this
Bro, you got to move back. Like, listen, we just elected like a real person for president. Like, you can come back. It'll be fine. Like, you can have like a legitimate internet connection. It'll be much better.
I hope so. Yeah, I'm stealing it from the neighbors. That's the whole thing. But I'm kidding. I'm not. But what were you asking about synergy?
So between the culture and the faith, right?
Yes.
Because you seem to be drawing a distinction there, but I want you to
Avail
spell it
myself
out
of
a
it.
little bit.
What are you saying?
So I want you to spell out that distinction a little bit better.
Sure. So I think that the church is responsible for delivering or for shepherding people to Christ, and specifically to union with God, both in this life and the next one. And I think the role of the church in doing that should be to optimize that journey for each individual. And it's my view that for most individuals, that journey goes through their native language rather than through an ancient language. However, as an Egyptian man, as a Kemetic man, I want to see my culture restored on the world stage. I want to see people refer to my country as Kemet, and I want to see a nation that values its Nile and that it treats its people well and has that same culture of at least I don't want to say I want to resurrect ancient Egyptian traditions and values. Obviously, I'm not a fan of slavery or any many of the other things that were happening then, but to be able to claim back the land that has been our ancestors for not just generations, but for literally millennia, and that we can trace our heritage to. I think that's important. I that we are not obviously going to maintain the same political, in that obviously I'm not a fan of absolute monarchy, or the same religious because I'm not a polytheist, or the same even traditional household values, although ancient Egypt was famously egalitarian between men and women. I think what's important to me is that the elements that we can salvage, the music, the language, the universal brotherhood of it, I think, and especially I think I'd like the mythology of it to be restored to it. We have a mythology that stretches further back than almost any people on this planet, and it's crazy to me that that's not universally recognized as part of our history. Like when we talk about the gods of ancient Egypt, we should be referring to them as the gods of our ancestors and the myths of the people before us and the foundational myths of our nation and our people as Kemetic people. Because where the Hebrew Bible established the Israelite nation, the Jewish faith, and what would become the people that would produce Jesus Christ, we come from a tradition ourselves. And we should be proud of that heritage equally and be universally able to help each other through our own journeys. And I'm kind of passionate about making that happen. I feel like the culture is that we participate in the culture. The religion will be a part of the culture, but I want to invite it's larger than religion. There are people who will not participate in Coptic Orthodox Christianity who should participate in the culture, who equally share our ancestry and our heritage, and who should see our foundational myths as theirs. It's each of them is a very big tent, and each of them overlaps, and the two overlap in huge ways, but they also must include many people that are outside of both spheres, in that the church must include people who are not part of the Kemetic culture, and the culture must include people who are not part of the church.
So this is where I must ask you something. I understand that you're not choosing either or, right? You're advocating for a both and, right? You're not saying, I value the culture at the expense of the religion. But there are people that value the religion at the expense of the culture that might resist what you're saying.
Sure. I think that's welcome. I think that debate is something that's good and healthy for any society, including our own. And I think those people are entitled to their opinions and they can choose not to participate. But I think that the culture and everyone doesn't have to participate in it. I would like it to, but it doesn't have to. I
I'm
would,
sure
in
you said
fact, prefer
something.
that it was able to get people on some
I'm sure you said
Sorry?
something brilliant, but your internet connection cut out.
Oh, no. Well, I'm sorry. What I was saying was that I'd like the church to participate, and those people are entitled to their opinions, but they can choose not to participate. And that's their problem, not mine. I think the culture is too important to let slide.
So you're saying ideally it doesn't happen in absentia of the church, but if it has to because they refuse to engage, then so be it.
Precisely. And I think the way that it chooses to engage should be smart as well. It should be wise. It shouldn't be we want to make everything that is Kemetic be religious, because that would be an improper way of doing it. It also, I don't think, would be very supportive of the church's mission. But I think to be able to sponsor certain things and ways that we can, things that are intended to bring us back to our roots, I think should come from Kemetic. Whereas things that are intended to be theotic, so to speak, should be given in whatever tongue is most suitable.
And to be facile, and just like we talked about with the paradox of theology, we shouldn't, again, like this is the third time the slippery slope nonsense comes up, in that, like, no, like engaging in this conversation and saying, hey, the church should be part of this conversation about what it means to be Kemetic. What is this, region misi of our heritage, is great and fair and appropriate, and things that are pastoral in nature, in terms of, like you said, bringing people to God. Like, no, that's not going to be ancient cultural, that's going to be modern cultural, and we should engage our current society and interrogate that to figure out what works. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially because you're not being rigid and saying, well, I have the answers and you need to do what I'm telling you. You're saying, let's talk about it and let's figure out what works for everyone.
I hope so. I hope that collaborative spirit, which is the spirit that the church fostered in its earliest stages, is what guides us through the next century.
Amen. All right, my friend. I appreciate your wisdom, your thoughtfulness, your passion, as always. I just realized you managed to turn me around from my disgruntled Arfan-ness earlier on, and that's even after your internet connection cut out like 3 or 4 more times.
I'm glad that I was able to do that for you, Mina. I hope you get to sleep well. I'm sorry I
That,
kept you up so late, but I'm glad you got me on the show. Thank you.
that's how much I like you. That I like you so much that it's more than I dislike your uh, homeless internet connection. Yeah, I love you too. I'm not doing that. All right.
Yay. All right.
Any parting words, my friend
Peace and love to all the brothers
and
brothers
sisters
and sisters.
and sisters? We
Absolutely right.
مش اتكلمنا على الموضوع ده.
And new free to everybody.
Yeah, no free, bro. No free.
New free.
All right. Thank you guys for listening.